Hey, what is up, y'all? Episode 42 of the Raw Prospect Podcast with my partner in crime, Emmy Nixon. How are you today, Emmy?
I'm chilling, man.
Great.
How's it going?
I hope I'm doing well. I hope all you guys who will be listening to this once we post it are also doing well, staying safe while we're still in the middle of this whole coronavirus pandemic. Hopefully all you guys are staying safe, social distancing, doing whatever you have to do to keep you and your family members and friends healthy during this time. Today, we're going to bring you lots of NBA discussion. We're going to do an NBA, another draft with players who have not made an All-Star game appearance. So we're going to draft a starting lineup plus a sixth man. And then after that, we're going to discuss how the NBA should best move forward with this year's regular season and playoffs. And we're also going to discuss whether this year's champion will have an asterisk next to it and what that could mean for that team. So with that being said, let's get started. We're going to do a draft. We're going to start off with this draft. These are players. We compiled a list of players who have not made an All-Star game appearance. They may have been voted to an All-Star game, but they haven't played in the All-Star game. So you might see players that we draft that maybe have made an All-Star team, but maybe not have played in the game because of injuries, etc. So with that being said, I'm going to get the first pick, and we're going to do a snake format. So Amy will get the next two picks, and I'll get the next two picks after that. So with all that being said, I think we should get started. So with the first pick in our, NBA players without an All-Star appearance draft, I am going to select... I think I have to go with CJ McCollum, shooting guard for the Portland Trailblazers.
All right. Solid pick there. I just wanted to say in our last draft that we did players under 25. You guys voted that my team was the better team. I think it was like 65% to whatever the other percentage was. And we're going to be doing a Twitter vote like that later for who was the better team. So my picks are going to be, I'm going to pick Kristaps Porzingis, and I'm going to pick Jaylen Brown.
Gotcha. Let me write those down. Do you have any explaining you want to do on that while I write them down?
Kristaps Porzingis, he obviously was voted into an All-Star game. I believe it was 2017. It was the year before he got injured his knee. But obviously he's still eligible because he didn't play. And to me, he was the best player on the board. I feel like that was a no-brainer. And then Jaylen Brown, I just wanted a wing to establish just that defensive energy. Plays hard, can shoot the three ball, can create his own shot from time to time. Basically do a little bit of everything.
So are you going to play Jaylen Brown as more of a shooting guard or a small forward? Or what do you consider him to be?
I consider him more as a small forward.
Okay.
But Boston does tend to run him at shooting guard with Gordon Hayward and Jason Tatum.
Right.
So it just depends on what players you put around him. But I feel like he's best at small forward.
Okay, so two good picks there. In terms of my pick, CJ McCollum, I just look at a guy I'm just looking for a guy who can score off the dribble, give me a bucket when I want it. I think he's averaged 20 plus points in 5 of his 7 years in the league, which is unbelievable. He comes from a small school. He's developed into a all-star caliber player. This year, he's averaging 22.5 points per game, 4.3 assists, 4 rebounds, shooting 45% from 3 and 38% 45% from the field and 38% from three. He's a 39% career three-point shooter. He can space the floor. Just a guy who can give me a bucket. So with my next two picks, Jaylen Brown was a really good one. I think I need an anchor to anchor my defense, and a guy who can protect the rim, a guy who's going to get rebounds, just be that dog. And I really like Montrezl Harrell for the Los Angeles Clippers to play that role. And then I'm also going to pick, I think I'm going to go Jamal Murray, point guard for the Denver Nuggets.
All right. Talk to me about those picks, man.
Let me write them down first.
So far you have Jamal Murray, CJ McCollum, and Montrezl Harrell.
Right.
All right, solid. And then I have...
you have Jaylen Brown and Kristaps Porzingis. But you have two more picks right now. But before that, as I said, Montrezl Harrell, I'm just looking for a big man who can kind of anchor my defense, play big on the boards. If you look at him, he's averaging 18.6 points per game and 7 rebounds on 59% from the field, which is pretty darn good if you ask me, along with over a block per game. So he protects the rim, he gets boards, he can score inside, he's improving, he's young. And then Jamal Murray, I view him as, with John Morant, he's another great guy in terms of the point guards on this list. But small sample size, I have a little bit more playoff experience with Jamal Murray now. And I like the way he passes, averaging over 5 assists per game before the season was suspended. He's a little streaky in terms of three-point shooting, but when he's hot, he's like one of the best. And he can score 18.8 points per game. So I just I'm getting players to fill different roles, if that makes sense.
Right.
So with that being said, you can go on with your next two picks.
So far I've got
Jaylen Brown.
Center. Yeah, I've got my center and my small forward. So I'm thinking I'm gonna grab a point guard. I'm gonna take De'Aaron Fox.
That's a great pick.
He's been holding it down in Sacramento these last couple of years. He brings it on the defensive end, and he's just frighteningly quick. He'll run the fast break in my offense, be able to have my players run the floor, be able to facilitate. And his jump shot is coming in really nicely. So I think in terms of in the future, I think he'll become a solid. I think his ceiling is probably around 24 points per game, maybe giving you 7-8 assists, So, and then my other guy, I'm between getting Gallinari or a guy like Zach LaVine who I can plug in at shooting guard, and he'll just be able to give you buckets as well. I'm going to take Zach LaVine.
All right, good pick.
So,
yeah, in terms of Zach LaVine, he's been putting up the numbers there in Chicago, and without him, they might be probably the worst team in the league. I mean, 25.5 points per game, 4.2 assists, 4.8 rebounds, shooting 38% from three. So he just gives you buckets. That's a really underrated pick.
All right, Zach LaVine, man, it's just he's a professional scorer. I think he's a Lou Williams type guy with a bigger frame and just freakishly athletic. So I mean, I feel like when you have the chance to get that good of a score with your third duo of picks, I guess you could call it, then I had to do it.
All right, so those are two good picks. So far, I have Jamal Murray, C.J. McCollum, and Montrezl Harrell. And Emmy has De'Aaron Fox, Zach LaVine, Jaylen Brown, and Kristaps Porzingis. So with my next two picks, I need to grab a small forward, and I also need another big man. So I think it appears to me the best small forward type player I can grab right now is Tobias Harris. So I'm going to get him. I'm going to plug him in at small forward. And then I need another big man. So I think, let's see.
We got guys like Steven Adams on the board, Serge Ibaka, DeAndre Ayton, Clint Capella. Yeah, there's a lot of good centers still up there. Or even a guy like Hassan Whiteside could be pretty interesting.
I'm looking at Capella, but his injury has been a concern. Same with Ayton, really talented, but his injuries have been a concern. I think I'm gonna have to go with I'm gonna go with Steven Adams.
All right. Yeah, I think that's the right pick there.
A guy who can play in the pick and roll, sets good screens, plays good defense.
Yeah, he does all the little things.
Yeah, does all that dirty work.
And he's a perfect pick and roll partner for any type of playmaking guard. A guy like Jamal Murray will just thrive off of Steven Adams. We saw Russell Westbrook do it for years, and now obviously Chris Paul. He's just a perfect team player, glue guy.
So that's going to complete my starting lineup with Jamal Murray, C.J. McCollum, Tobias Harris, Montrezl Harrell, and Steven Adams. You're up. You need another big man and a sixth man for your last two picks of the draft, so you can go ahead with those.
I'm gonna take Serge Ibaka. I think my team needs a veteran presence, and whether you want to plug him in at power forward or center, either or, I think it would work fine either way. But if you think about what he brought to the table for the Raptors in that playoff run just last year, just a stabilizer is the biggest thing that comes to mind. He was getting offensive rebounds. He was putting up shots in the post, making his jumpers. So here you have a guy who can defend at a high level, and he can spread the floor pretty well. So I feel like he's a good role player to have.
All right, and then your sixth man?
Sixth man, the tough thing here is I'm between Lou Williams and a guy like Fred VanVleet, which might surprise you, but I'm really high on Fred VanVleet. I think he can become a future All-Star. That's how high I am on Fred VanVleet. But
I'm gonna actually look up his I have Basketball Reference pulled up. I'm gonna look up Fred VanVleet because I believe he was averaging almost 18 points per game, 3.8 rebounds, and 6.6 assists. And he's been a really vital part of Toronto's success now that, Kawhi's gone. And they're still hanging, I believe, as like the second seed in the East, right behind Milwaukee. And he's been a vital part in their success. So, yeah, I think a lot of people are overlooking what Fred VanVleet can become.
Right. I think I'm going to pick Fred VanVleet.
Okay.
He's a better defender. That's the biggest differentiator for me. I feel like people pick on Lou Williams on the defensive end.
All right. So that completes your team. So for those of y'all, just to be clear, Emmy's team for this undrafted NBA players without an all-star appearance draft. You have De'Aaron Fox, Zach LaVine, Jaylen Brown, Kristaps Porzingis, Serge Ibaka, and your sixth man coming off the bench, Fred VanVleet. So with the last pick, I have to pick a sixth man, and I think I'm going to go with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, point guard for the Oklahoma City Thunder.
Solid pick there. I considered him as well, but I actually I figured that I picked a lot of the same people from last time. I had already picked Jaylen Brown and him.
Right. So, in terms of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, he's made a big leap in his second season from 10 points per game to 19 points per game, 3.3 assists, 6.1 rebounds. He's a fairly good three-point shooter, 35%, and he brings that intensity on the defensive end. And if you look at his crunch time numbers, he's been great in crunch time. In fact, I think with him on the floor, the Oklahoma City Thunder, or one of their lineups, I'm not sure, I don't have the exact stat nugget or whatever you want to say, but with him on the floor, the Oklahoma City's crunch time numbers are like off the charts and at the top of the league. So he's a guy I can rely on to score, bring the intensity on the defensive end, and that's really all I want in a guy coming off the bench. So
right,
that's
just like giving him a second. I thought he would be good coming to Oklahoma City, but I didn't think he would be good this quick.
Right.
With all the praise that the Clippers teammates were giving him in that rookie season, I feel like I should have saw this coming. You saw Montrezl Harrell and Patrick Beverley and guys like that give him a ton of praise, and before they trade him away. So right. I feel like that was really good foreshadowing for what he's become so quickly.
Yep. So just for you guys out there, we are going to post both our teams on Twitter just like we did with the under 25 draft in episode 41. By the way, you can catch that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. So if you haven't seen that yet, go check that out. Leave a 5-star rating. Hit the like button. Whatever you have to do. We would greatly appreciate that. But we will post these teams on Twitter just like we did the last time. And you guys can vote for which team would, I think, win a 7-game series.
While we're on the topic, guys, I just want to address that we're actually planning on making a few changes to the podcast in the future. So we're gonna start posting twice a week now. First of all, and also we're going to be shortening our episodes a little bit. We're going to be between the 45-minute to an hour range,
right?
Instead of some of our episodes being like hour 25 or something like that. So, just
keep those changes in mind
for everyone seeing the differences in our episodes in the future.
Yeah, I think 45 minutes to an hour will be enough for y'all twice a week. It'll pretty much equal or just go over what we do in what we have done in one episode with those 90-minute episodes. So you'll be getting pretty much the same amount of content,
right?
But maybe even more because we're doing more episodes per week. Anyways, that was a good thing to mention. I was going to mention that at the end, but now they know. So with that, unless you have anything else you want to discuss in terms of our draft here, and maybe, in our next episode we can come back and discuss the results and, see what we think about the results. So maybe we'll do that in the next episode. But with that being said, I think we should move on to our NBA discussion.
Yeah, I agree.
So maybe we'll come back to that in episode 43, which I think we probably should be able to do this weekend, most likely.
Right. Yes. Yeah. In the coming days, for sure.
In the coming days, for sure. So we're going to have a NBA discussion, and we have quite some time to dive deep into these two topics. And we really haven't discussed this since this coronavirus pandemic hit and sports were suspended. We really haven't discussed the logistics of how these leagues, not only the NBA, but baseball, the MLB, the NHL, who I think just announced the plan yesterday, and all these leagues, how are they going to come back to playing? How are they going to resume playing? In what formats are they going to resume playing in? While staying safe with all the safety concerns with the coronavirus and, all the problems with, salary caps, revenue, TV deals, all this stuff. There's all these factors that factor into how these leagues are going to come back. So the question that we're going to propose for discussion is, what is the best plan of action for the NBA to resume their season? Meaning either regular season or playoffs, whatever you want.
Right.
However you want to phrase it.
Yeah, and the weird thing about this situation is this is the weird dystopian, the society that we would never think would happen. So this is the perfect time for the NBA, for example, to start experimenting with different formats that they've actually proposed beforehand.
So why not you first give us your thoughts on how the NBA should best resume their season, how they should move forward if we do in fact see some version of the NBA playoffs.
I think the best way to do it, I think there's no right answer. I think it's really just personal preference. But to me, I see it as resuming the regular season, playing about 5 to 10 games. Any way you want to do that, so that the teams have played the same amount of games, and then from there, having the top 20 teams have the 20th seed play the 17th seed, and then 20th play 16th, and then 17th play 18th.
Okay.
No, I was right before. 20th play 17th, and then 18th play 19th. I'm sorry about that, guys.
Okay.
And then basically that team would go on the winners from those games would play each other, and then that team would play the 16th seed to see if they make the playoffs. So that way, all these teams that are still in contention would still get their fair shot. But I don't know if there's a great way of doing that, because those games would only be it would only be a 1-game series, and would that really be the rightful better team? Who knows?
Right.
It's one game.
Yeah, I think that's something which should definitely be in consideration, giving those teams who are in position to maybe make a run for a playoff position a chance to do it. I think, in my opinion, there are 2 ways they should do this. They can choose which one. But in my opinion, there are 2 really good ways they should do this. The first way is just have a 1 through 16 bracket, mix it up a little, regardless of conference, and I'm sure you've seen it, guys, if you've been on Twitter or wherever you get your sports news or whatever. Just a 1 through 16 bracket based on record. Have the 1 play the 16. the 8 play the 9 or whatever, kind of like a March Madness style, and still
Right.
have those best of 7 series. But instead of just going by conference, now you've mixed it up. But a format I really like, they could do that. Or a format I really like, which may get a little more, I guess, gimmicky, or maybe begging for attention. In an article that came out yesterday by an NBA writer for The Ringer, Kevin O'Connor, very reliable NBA source. The NBA has proposed to their GMs a format where it's basically like a World Cup style, I'm talking about the playoffs here, a World Cup style group stage into the first round of this year's playoffs, where the 20 teams with the best records, the 16 current playoff teams as stands now, and the next 4 best teams with the best records, which would be the Trailblazers, the Pelicans, the Kings, and the Spurs, those teams would be allocated into 5 tiers based on a descending order of record. So the teams with the best records would be in tier 1 and so forth, all the way down to tier 5. And then groups would be randomly drawn. 4 groups would be randomly drawn with 1 team from each tier going into each group. And I'll lay this out in a minute for you guys. The teams within each group would play each other team in their group twice, making for a total of 8 games. And the 2 teams with the best record from each group would advance. So for example, in this article by Kevin O'Connor from The Ringer, he lays it out. Here's a possible scenario. So you'd have your tiers. Let me lay out your tiers first. Tier 1 would be the Bucks, Lakers, Raptors, and Clippers. Tier 2 would be the Jazz, the Heat, the Celtics, and the Nuggets. And this is based on record, again. Tier 3, Sixers, Rockets, Thunder, Pacers. Tier 4, the Mavericks, the Grizzlies, the Magic, and the Nets. And Tier 5 are those 4 teams that aren't in playoff position, but would be vying for a playoff spot in this format. The Blazers, the Pelicans, the Spurs, and the Kings. Okay? Those are your tiers. Now, the groups in this hypothetical scenario, Group 1 would be the Bucks, the Jazz, the Sixers, the Grizzlies, and the Blazers. Group 2 would be the Lakers, the Heat, the Rockets, the Magic, and the Pelicans. Group 3 would be the Raptors, Celtics, Thunder, Mavericks, and Spurs. And Group 4 would be the Clippers, Nuggets, Pacers, Nets, and Kings. Now let me address, I know you might be thinking, oh, well, this is gimmicky. There are some problems. It could be unfair to the, top 4 teams if they get a tough draw. All these problems. But let me remind you, as you mentioned earlier, there is really you're not going to get a perfect format. We're not living in a perfect world. This is something we can't control. There's really no perfect answer here. Let me just make my case. First of all, this type format would create a high sense of urgency, like a March Madness type vibe. Every game would matter, and there would always be a good matchup on for you to watch. There'd be, games from like 11 a.m. to, late at night in this format for like 2 or 3 weeks, and that'd be good for ratings. Secondly, it would create like a gambling bonanza, with games running all day for 2 to 3 weeks, and it'd be good for the league. It'd be good for the the publicity, the ratings, as I mentioned. And it would guarantee more games, which may help the NBA earn some of the money they've lost due to this layoff or the suspension of the season back. Since the NBA switched to a 7-game format back in, I think it was 2002, 2003, the average number of first-round games is 44. In this format, with each team playing 8 games, there would be a total of 80 games in a span of 2 to 3 weeks, and that could help the league earn back some of the revenue they're going to be losing because of no fans, etc. I just think the main reason, and I'm doing this because I think the NBA is in the sports are in the entertainment business, and people want to see live competition. They want to see something different. They want to see something interesting. And there is such a high pent-up demand for live sports broadcasts in America right now, and that I think this would be perfect. And it's evidenced by higher viewership numbers in recent live sporting events. I mean, you look at this past weekend. Capital wins the match. I'm not sure you watched that, but it was great. Featuring, Tiger Woods and Peyton Manning against Phil Mickelson and Tom Brady for charity. That drew an average of 5.8 million viewers.
Wow.
And peaked at 6.3 million viewers. That makes this the most watched golf broadcast in the history of cable television. And it doubles the amount of people who watched the second round of last year's Masters tournament, which only drew 3.2 million viewers. And that was the tournament that Tiger Woods, won. Now, of course, Sunday, that got humongous ratings. It was like 10 million plus. But this doubled the second round of last year's Masters. You look at a sport that we don't really pay any attention to, the NASCAR race, NASCAR series has resumed. Last weekend's Real Heroes 400 race at Darlington Raceway drew an average of 6.3 million viewers. That's up 38% from their last race, the Fan Shield 500 in Phoenix, which took place right before all these sports were suspended. And you even look at not live sports, but documentaries. That Last Dance documentary about Michael Jordan in the 1990s Bulls, that drew an average of 5.6 million viewers across 10 episodes, the most watched documentary ever produced by ESPN. So the bottom line here is sports fans across America, they're famished, for a lack of better term, in terms of sports, and they will watch the NBA regular season, the NBA playoffs, regardless of format. And it's evidenced by the numbers that I just put out there. So I think this group stage, it'd be highly entertaining. It'd be good for the league's revenue. It'd be good for the fans. It'd be good for gambling. It would guarantee more games, which would also be good for the fans. And there'd be a higher sense of urgency. I mean, who would I want to watch? Would I want to watch the Bucks sweep the Magic, or do I want to watch the Bucks play the Jazz twice, the Sixers twice, the Grizzlies twice, and the Blazers twice? I think I want to watch, the latter one. So, I mean, and I'm talking in terms of what I want to see. So that's just my, laid out argument for the group stage. And this doesn't have to be permanent. This is all temporary. They can experiment with any of these different formats that either Emmy or I have mentioned, and they can, see what they like and see what they don't like. This is not a permanent thing as of now. So
right. I think the first thing that popped in my head when you mentioned the group stage format, the way you put it out, was I think maybe it would work a little bit better if it was actually the top 10 teams from each conference.
Okay.
Because actually I think the Eastern Conference teams, if we just disregarded the fact that they actually have a chance to make the playoffs.
Right. And yes, that is a drawback of this particular scenario, and a valid one too. I think this wouldn't be the exact way they do it. I think maybe if you wanted to, you could just do maybe like 3 groups of 6 instead of, 4 groups of 5, if that's how you want to do it, and maybe just have, the Blazers and the Pelicans and give an opportunity to, I don't know, who are the teams up there in the East Conference playoff race? Let's see.
I think it was...
give an opportunity to like maybe a Washington or a Charlotte or a Chicago to get in there. But yeah, if you want to, be fair to the Eastern Conference, you could consider something like that. And another thing, if you don't want to draw randomly, maybe this is something that's been mentioned. I'm just going by what's been, put out there.
Right.
Maybe you let the tier 1 teams, the Bucks, the Lakers, the Raptors, and the Clippers, maybe you let them choose who they want in their group. You give them a bunch of teams, the eligible playoff teams, and maybe a couple teams that are vying for playoff spots. And I know it'd be difficult. I know there'd be controversy, but there's going to be controversy either way you do it. So, maybe you let them choose who they want in their group, whether you do that, whether you make that televised or whether you do that, in a private meeting or whatever. That's their decision. But that's another potential drawback because, people will say, oh, well, the Bucks could potentially get screwed because they could have, I don't know, they have the Jazz, the Sixers, and the Grizzlies in their group, and that could, those are 2 really good teams and another team that has potential to be a dark horse, and that could, that could be unfair to the teams who've been really good through the first 55 games of this year's regular season. But in reality, this is, any way you put it, any way you try, there's going to be something that people are going to complain about. And you just have to figure out the best way. And that's why it's taking a while for the NBA to figure this out. There are so many factors, like I mentioned earlier. So, unless there's anything you want to add, that's how we think the NBA should resume their season. And I'm sure once they actually come out with a plan, we will discuss it on a future podcast and what we think and how it'll all play out.
I actually wanted to add something about your 1 through 16 bracket as well. I think that would actually be really interesting for in this situation specifically.
Right.
Because the problem with the reason why they haven't gone through with doing that before is because of the travel. So now you're taking travel out of the equation.
Right.
And maybe they can do something like that. I think that would be really interesting.
I think that would be really fun as well. In fact, give me a second. You can keep talking. I'm going to actually look up the bracket, how the bracket would shape out, so we can maybe discuss that a little bit.
Right. I actually... because that way, I think it would still reward the teams that were
already in playoff
throughout the regular season already,
right?
And it would also give, it would just give some new It would add some new, maybe new casual viewers that wouldn't have viewed the playoffs anyway.
Yes. And I think
they're doing something new.
I think that's as I mentioned. A big part of this for the league, whether you want to believe it or not, is TV ratings. Without fans, they have to find new and creative ways to attract not only the fans who were watching before, who I'm sure will still watch, but you never know what will happen, and new fans who might, not even maybe watch the NBA as much as those other people. That's a huge part of this. And so in terms of the 16-team bracket, I think that is probably a little less controversial in terms of the format, because you're just mixing up the conferences, and you're not giving teams like a Portland or even a New Orleans, or maybe even in the Eastern Conference like a Chicago, an opportunity to maybe all of a sudden knock out like the Lakers or the Bucks or an actual top tier contender out in the first round. I don't think the NBA really wants that. I don't think they want the Clippers gone, in the first round, because we all want to see, the Lakers play the Clippers or the Clippers play the Bucks, either, in the finals or conference finals. We want to see those matchups. So maybe with this 16-team playoff bracket, we might get those matchups and it'd be less controversial in terms of allowing the teams who weren't already in playoff position an opportunity to knock off those teams early, which is what the group stage would I guess provide a potential to happen. So I have the 16-team bracket. I'll run through it real quick and then we'll move on. So you still have the Bucks play the Magic and the Heat play the Thunder. The winners of those two matchups would move on to play each other. Then you'd have the Lakers play the Nets and the Jazz play the Rockets. Really interesting matchups. Those two teams would move on. And this is all 7-game series. Same thing. Then you'd have the Raptors play the Grizzlies and the Nuggets play the Pacers. Those two teams, the winners of those two matchups, would move on and play each other. And then finally, you'd have the Clippers play the Mavericks and the Celtics play the Sixers. Two really great matchups. Those two teams would move on to play each other, and so forth. Again,
that's interesting. So the Clippers would still play the Mavericks. Yeah.
Yes.
That's actually unsettling for me as a Mavericks fan, because that is not a good matchup.
Of course,
story for another day.
we can get into, our own teams once the format comes out,
Right.
I guess I don't want to admit it, but one of the reasons I like this group stage is because the Spurs actually have a shot at keeping their, whatever it is, 22-year streak alive.
Hey, but another thing, you can't end the streak if there was no playoffs.
Well, there you go. But in this scenario,
yeah, that was just a joke.
I don't want to admit that.
I completely get that.
Yep. So we're at 42 minutes. That was a great discussion. We went really deep into that. I really like that. So let's finish up. You wanted to explore or discuss whether there be an asterisk on this year's champion.
Right.
So why don't you go ahead with your thoughts on that?
Right. I think this is just such an interesting topic because it also depends on who wins the championship.
Right.
Like, say a team like the Jazz goes out and shocks the world and wins it all, then there would definitely be an asterisk next to that, because that's just out of left field, and it takes away the fact that they didn't have the best momentum when the season was stopped, and then now they have momentum now, so then it would just feel different,
Yes.
But if you look at lockout shortened seasons, for example, like the 2012 season, when you think about that Heat title, you don't think it has an asterisk next to it. So it really has to do with context. It really has to do with context, really. But another factor into that is the fact that they won the next year, that they repeated. So if, say, they lost in 2013 and that super team era only won one ring rather than two, does that title have an asterisk? I think it would,
Right. There's two different questions here. One is, will it have an asterisk? And two is, do you think it should have an asterisk?
Right.
And the answer to that second question, I think, as you mentioned, depends on who wins the title and how, what different things play out throughout the course of their journey, through the NBA playoffs, the rest of the regular season, whatever happens, that's all going to depend on the team and how they got there. But will there be an asterisk? I think there will be, but I think we have to define what we mean by asterisks in these particular scenarios, if that makes sense. I think if the teams we expect to win, like the Bucks or the Lakers or the Clippers, if they end up winning this year, I think the asterisks, there will always be critics, but I think the asterisk placed next to that team's title will carry more of a positive connotation than more of a negative connotation, like the ways we look at, the Astros in 2017 now, or, I don't know. There are multiple examples I don't have in front of me, but those are just ones that came to me off the top of my head. But yes, I think basically what I'm saying is I think there will be an asterisk, but what will that asterisk mean? And I think if the teams we expect to win, regardless of, what happens, I think the asterisk will carry a positive connotation because this year they really you can't control this situation. You can't control, the world we're living in. You can't control this pandemic this virus that's going around, So I think it'll just be like, okay, well, the regular season was shortened and you got these breaks in the playoffs, but you earned it because in the end your players stayed resilient throughout this whole thing. They were in shape, they kept themselves in shape. That's part of this during the whole suspension. There are tons of factors. I could go on and on. But to answer the question, yes, there will be an asterisk, but you have to consider, what does the asterisk mean? And I think it means, well, the season was different, but I think whoever wins will still earn that
ring.
Yeah.
Right. But there's actually another layer to this as well, like the fact that they are willing to experiment. Say they go to, for example, the 1 through 16 format, and then they never do it again. Is that another way it could be seen as illegitimate?
Well, there you go. I think that's another perspective. That's another lens you can view this whole conversation through that I didn't really, I guess, think of previously. But yes, different format. They didn't play, it was a shortened season. There are tons of things. But in terms of I guess what I'm saying is, one last question we should, talk about is do these different, I guess, changes in terms of the format of both the rest of the regular season and playoffs, do these changes make the title this year any less, I guess, significant or what's the word? Or, I don't know. I don't know what I was going to say, but do these hinder or do they diminish the significance of this year's title, I guess is what I'm trying to ask. What do you think?
Yeah, like historically.
Right.
Well, it's just, we're going to have to wait and see, I guess.
Yeah.
If you look at the 99 season, though, that season was also cut short. It was actually a lot worse than the 2012 lockout. They didn't start the season until February, I believe, and they played about 55 games, and they fit that in just that short amount of time. So
that was
injury, a ton of fatigue.
For those of you
and
who
the
don't
Spurs
know,
ended up winning, but you
right.
never see anybody talking about that title. So
Right. You know, I mean, we can go back all the way to, when I'm sure most of y'all, watched the Last Dance documentary, and they talked about when MJ, went to play baseball, and, the Rockets won back-to-back titles, and with Hakeem Olajuwon and all those guys, and I guess, do people really talk about that? Like, no, they still talk about Hakeem Olajuwon as one of the top 15 greatest players in NBA history. They don't say, well, oh, Michael Jordan wasn't playing, so it would have been different if he was still playing basketball at that time. Maybe it would have, but do people really speak about it in that way? And then the same thing with the Spurs. Like when we view Tim Duncan, we view him as a guy who won 5 rings, all legitimate in most of the public's eyes, and almost won 6, by the way. And we view him as a top 10 player all time, the best, arguably, probably the best power forward all time. Like it historically, these type things have not really diminished the significance of said team's title in said year. These type situations, the public has still viewed those teams as legitimate champions. So
right.
I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Right, exactly. That's why I thought this topic was so interesting.
Right.
There's so many layers to it. There's the layers we discussed, and there's also the layers within certain players' legacies as well.
Right.
Like, say, if a LeBron wins a title this year, would it mean that it's just like 3.5 titles, or are people going to really get behind what he did on the floor? So,
and it's kind of the same with Duncan. In that first championship season with the Spurs, there was only 50 games played. But people don't really say, Duncan won 4.5 instead of 5, so. But I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, at the end of the day, everybody is facing the same things, and they're just going to do the best they can. So I feel like, for me personally, I'm not going to put an asterisk next to who wins. I feel like they're going to have to win the games they win. They played the people in front of them, and that's it at the end of the day.
You play the games you're given based on the situation you're given, and you deal with it, and you do your best, and you play the games. So, I guess we'll see what happens, and I'm sure we'll come back to this topic once champion is crowned, or maybe in the mix of the whole NBA playoffs, something happens, and we have to come back and readdress this topic. But that's going to do it for today's episode of the Raw Prospect Podcast. As Emmy mentioned, just real quick, we are making some changes. Our podcast from now on will be recorded twice a week and posted to, again, Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. We're going to shorten the podcast, 45 minutes to an hour. I think that should be good in terms of you guys listening. And then also, we might explore, some other things, some intro music, things of that nature. But we're going to look into that in the future, and that might take some time. But I hope you guys like this. Again, go leave a 5-star rating and review. Hit the like button. Subscribe to our channel. Do whatever you have to do. We greatly appreciate it.
Those of you watching on YouTube as well, leave a comment on what you think about this stuff. So we'd love to hear from what your point of view is on these topics, because again, a lot of this is personal preference and just your personal opinion. So
we love to hear what you guys have to say. Leave us feedback. Give us feedback. You can DM us on Instagram, Twitter, whatever you have to do. We'd love to hear you guys' feedback. As Emmy mentioned in the comments on our YouTube videos, whatever you think we'd like to hear, and we greatly appreciate it. So with all that being said, that's going to do it. We will see you in a couple days for episode 43. Should be a good one. That's it. Peace out.